Hey guys, what's up? How are you doing? Welcome back to the DynamoDB Golang CRUD project series. I know I've been away for a while. It's been a while since I uploaded my last video in this series, and this video is because I was changing cities. I was in the middle of a lot of work, and I also had to finish other series on my channel. If you haven't checked out the restaurant management project series on my channel, do check it out. It's a huge series, and I'm basically I've explained a lot of things. So now this series and all the other old series, I want to finish them quickly because I have a lot of new content coming up really soon for Golang, and I just want all of my audience to be at par with and basically comfortable with the tools that I usually use with Golang. All right. So we had done our routes. We have already done our routes and repository, all those different things, and adapters for the database. What we want to focus now is on controllers. We want to focus on controllers. So create a file in your controllers folder called product go, and you want to call this, the package is going to be called product. You're going to have an import statement which will import a couple of things, and the first thing you want to create is controllers, which is of type struct. And you want to create an interface of type interface. Okay, then you'll have a function which will basically create a new controller for you. It's going to return an interface. We'll soon understand why, right? Don't worry right now. And then I'll have some functions, right? So all the routes that I'll have functions and then routes and handlers and then functions. These functions basically have a 1:1 relationship with the routes and with the handlers. Okay, so let me show it to you. Basically with the routes you have these functions, right? Post, get, put, and all those different things. You basically will have functions for those routes. So the functions that we'll have will be list one, and we'll have a function for list all with 2 L's obviously, and then we'll have a function for create and update, which are basically the fundamental blocks for a CRUD operation. You can have just list, which is view or read, right? In a CRUD, it's called read, the CRUD. And for reading, we have two different options. We can just get one entity, or we can get all the entities from the database. So, which is basically how that corresponds to your routes is get all or get by ID. Okay, so you have create and you have a function called update. You'll have a function called remove, and that's about it actually. So list one is going to take the ID because you need the ID, right? And in the API, it will be basically get by ID. So you'll list one, you'll have uid.uuid, and you'll return something from here. You'll return an entity. We have to still work on entities, don't worry. So entity will return entity, product, or it'll return an error. So that's what a list one function does. Okay. And list all doesn't take anything. It doesn't require an ID as such to work on, because it's just basically going to return all of those all of the data that exists in the database. But what it's going to return is our entities which is a slice of type product, and you also have an error out here. Now, one thing that we need to keep in mind is once we define this controller out here, the struct called controller, right? All of these, list one, list all, and all the other functions as well, are going to be struct methods. Struct methods are an important concept, and we have been using it for quite some time in all of our series. Do check it out in the Golang tour if you don't know what struct methods are. So basically what I'm going to say is that this is a struct method, and this is the way to say that. Right? These are methods for the struct called controller. And similarly with list all, list all is also the struct method. Okay. And similarly for my create, update, and remove, all of them are struct methods. So all I have to do is just copy and paste quickly. Okay. And to create, read, create, update, and delete, what you need to have is basically for creation, you're going to accept the complete entity, which is going to type product, and it's going to, after creating that entity, it's going to return the ID of that entity. It's saying that, hey, in our database, we have created that entity. This is the ID that you can now use for whatever purposes that you want to use, right? Just to give a proof that, okay, I have added something in the database. So that's why you need that UUID. So I'll say it's of type UUID, and otherwise, if it doesn't go through, as in something doesn't get added to the database, we're going to return the error, okay? So you may have noticed that I speak really fast. I just have this habit, okay, I think fast, so I speak fast. If you have a problem with that, do slow down the video to 0.5x, and then you'll be good, okay? You'll be good to go. So do check it out, do try making it 0.5x, and you'll start understanding what I'm saying. Because I see a lot of comments where people say that I speak too fast, and that's because when I learn coding, right, when I learn from other people, if I watch any video, I watch that to 2x usually. So I think if I speak fast, then it just saves you time. You don't have to 2x it or 1.5x it or whatever. Okay, so for update, you have ID and entity and star product ID. That's because when you're updating something, you need the ID because you want to tell the database that this is the ID of the product that I want to update. But I also want to send the new entity, the new product, that, hey, this is the new product that you want to replace your existing product with. All right. So that's why I'm sending an entity also, which is of type product. I hope that makes sense. For removal, it's very simple. It's just the ID. You always pass just the ID, and we just return the error if there's any error. So for remove, you'll say ID UUID.UUID. Okay, and that's about it. So now the whole thing revolves around the controller, right? Because as you saw, all of these are controller methods, and like the struct method, sorry. So everything revolves around the struct called controller that we have created right now. So what is it? The controller is it has basically repository, which is basically adapter.interface. Okay, so what does that mean now? If you go over to your repository and you go over to adapter and you go over to your interface, these are all the things that you have access to. You have access to health, find all, find one, create or update, and delete. Okay, so that's what your controller is basically now. Okay, and here you have your interface, and interface basically is going to be list one. Interface will make it very easy to interface with all our functions that we are defining out here. So, and this again, we have list all, create, and update, and remove. Okay. So we just define it here that the list one will need id.uuid.uuid. Interface basically helps us to create a lot of abstraction. And you have entity product.product, error. List all doesn't require anything, but it does return entities, which, as you have already defined, is product.product. Sorry for the wrong spelling. And error. There will be error out here. Create accepts an entity and returns either the ID of the new entity that has been added to the database, or it returns an error. And update, you've already seen it requires the UUID. And update, you already know, takes the ID and takes the entity and returns error mostly. And remove just takes UUID.UUID and it returns the error. Perfect. So that's what your controller looks like. Okay. Now the new controller function is again going to return a controller, okay, mostly. So it will take in repository adapter.interface and it returns an interface, which is this interface. And what is it going to return? Like I said, controller, repository, and repository. So this helps you create the new controller. Now let's work on the list one function so that all of this that we've done right now will make sense to you. Okay. So firstly, that you will get in your list one is basically your ID, right? So first you'll create your entity. You'll say entity.id is equal to ID that you just received here, because when you want to list something, you want to list that, basically get it from the database. So you're going to pass the ID and you'll have it in your entity.id, and then you'll have your c.repository. Now when I'm doing this, right, c.repository, because I can do that because I have access to the controller, which is the controller, because since it's a controller or a struct method, right? So I have access to that, so I can say a c.repository dot find one, and I can say entity dot get filter ID, comma entity dot table name. Okay, so we are basically able to call this function called get filter ID, which will help us to get something from the database directly. And we're going to pass the table name, and in which table, like let's say products or users or whatever, right? So in our case, it's product. So in which table do you want to look for this particular ID or the data with this particular ID? Now we want to handle our error. So whatever we get from here is going to be either response or error. So if the error is not equal to nil, you want to return the entity and return the error. Otherwise, if all goes well, then you want to return product dot parse dynamo attribute to struct response dot item. Now, if you've worked with a project which has entities and this kind of a structure, right, the one that I'm showing you before, adapters and interfaces and all that, then you would easily understand what's going on here. But there's a high chance that you probably don't know, you've not worked with this kind of a pattern where we use entities. And that's completely fine. So I'm assuming you didn't understand this function, right? And you're not understanding what is get filtered by ID, even though it's just basically going to take this and going to call a database function somewhere and get the data, right? But you're not understanding how it's working with entity and what is entity here, and what is passed and more attributes to struct, right? So in the next video, what I'll do is, instead of building all these functions, I'll build the entities so that all of this will start making a lot more sense to you. Okay, so let's do that actually. So a lot of you would have understood this because you have seen this kind of a pattern before, but a lot of you do not. You probably know what's happening here because it's basically calling a database function somewhere and getting some data, right? List one by ID, but you don't know exactly how it's happening. So for that, what I'll do is I'll create the entities file in the next video, and you will understand a lot more, if you're seeing this pattern for the first time, which I'm not sure how many of you are actually. Okay, so I'll take your leave now, and I'll upload the next video tomorrow or day after tomorrow, but I'll be regular on this series, so I'll finish it quickly because I have a lot of new content coming up on my channel. All right, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.